Oh, Vikings, let's win this game.
The Vikings just received a strong message about a $70 million playmaker. Meanwhile, they're suddenly being linked to the best pass rusher still available in free agency. At the same time, a critical $104 million cornerstone appears to be fully healthy again. And on a completely different front, one former Viking is returning to the building in a role nobody expected a few years ago. On the surface, these might feel like separate stories, but taken together, they reveal a lot about where this team stands as training camp starts getting closer. There's a conversation starting to get louder around a player who not too long ago felt like one of the safest investments this organization could make. Back when the Vikings committed serious money to one of the league's premier pass-catching tight ends, most fans felt good about it. The offense needed another weapon. Kevin O'Connell wanted versatility. The future looked bright, but football moves fast, and contracts age even faster. That brings us to T.J. Hockenson. Earlier this offseason, Minnesota reworked his contract, creating roughly $5 million in cap savings and lowering his 2026 cap hit. On the surface, that sounds like smart business, but hidden beneath the restructure is a reality that's difficult to overlook. The final year of his contract disappeared, meaning 2026 is now set to be his last season under contract with Minnesota. Then came another uncomfortable layer. Bleacher Report recently listed Hockenson among the worst contracts in the NFL. That's not exactly the kind of company any player wants to keep. The criticism centers around declining production. Since the start of 2024, he's scored only 3 touchdowns and has failed to reach 500 receiving yards in each of the last 2 seasons. For a player carrying elite tight end money, those numbers create difficult questions. Vikings fans know injuries played a role. We know how hard he worked to get back on the field. But the NFL doesn't evaluate contracts based on effort. It evaluates results. That's the harsh reality. The organization appears to understand that too. Rather than absorb a painful financial hit by moving on immediately, Minnesota seems prepared to give Hockenson another opportunity to prove he still belongs among the league's best. And maybe he does. Maybe a healthier season changes everything. Maybe J.J. McCarthy unlocks a new version of this offense. If that happens, this conversation looks very different a few months from now. But if it doesn't, the tight end position could become one of the biggest off-season priorities next year. Meanwhile, Justin Jefferson offered some encouraging insight into the development of McCarthy. One detail stood out. Jefferson said the young quarterback has improved his touch, learning that not every throw needs to arrive at 100 miles per hour. Vikings fans noticed that too. The arm talent was never the question. The refinement always was. Hearing Jefferson recognize that growth feels significant because it's one of those small details that can completely change how an offense operates. Even more interesting was his approach to the quarterback competition. Rather than choosing sides, he emphasized building chemistry with both McCarthy and Kyler Murray so the offense is prepared regardless of who wins the job. That's leadership. That's maturity. And as this competition continues, the future of the offense remains one of the most fascinating storylines on the roster. There's a fascinating opportunity sitting out there right now, and the Vikings might be one of the few teams positioned perfectly to take advantage of it. Every offseason, there comes a point when a veteran player remains available longer than expected. Fans start wondering why. Front offices weigh the risks. Then suddenly a contender gets stronger when nobody sees it coming. That brings us to one of the most recognizable pass rushers of the last decade. Joey Bosa remains available. Let that sink in for a second. A player with his resume is still sitting on the market while teams continue evaluating their rosters. ESPN recently ranked him as the best edge defender still available in free agency, and it's not hard to see why. Even after dealing with injuries earlier in his career, Bosa still managed 5 sacks, 5 forced fumbles, and 42 pressures last season. He may not be the dominant every-down force he once was, but he can still impact games. And that's where the Vikings become interesting. Brian Flores already has Andrew Van Ginkel. Dallas Turner is expected to step into a larger role after Minnesota moved on from Jonathan Greenard during the draft. But depth matters, especially in Flores' aggressive defense. Behind those starters, the Vikings are relying heavily on younger, unproven options. That's not necessarily a problem. The question is whether Minnesota wants a little more insurance once meaningful games begin. Adding a veteran specialist who can attack quarterbacks in key situations would create flexibility. Imagine 3rd and long situations with Flores dialing up pressure packages and Bosa rotating into the mix. That becomes difficult for opposing offenses to handle. But there's another angle Vikings fans should appreciate. The Green Bay Packers reportedly make sense as a destination too. In fact, some analysts believe Green Bay might be one of the strongest fits available. Their pass rush situation isn't exactly overflowing with proven production right now. If the Packers add Bosa, that's one more weapon Minnesota has to face inside the division. If the Vikings sign him instead, they strengthen themselves while preventing a rival from doing the same. That's part of what makes this situation so interesting. Now, none of this means a signing is imminent. Veteran free agents often take their time. Financial considerations matter. Scheme fit matters. Health evaluations matter. But when you look at Minnesota's roster and the way Flores likes to attack offenses, it's hard not to see the appeal. Sometimes the smartest offseason move isn't chasing a superstar. Sometimes it's finding the perfect complementary piece before someone else does. There are certain players whose value goes beyond statistics. You don't fully appreciate them until they're gone. Then suddenly the entire structure around them feels different. For the Vikings, one of those players has always been the man protecting the quarterback's blind side. The last couple of seasons have been frustrating, painful, and frankly exhausting for Christian Darrisaw. Vikings fans watched one of the NFL's premier left tackles battle through injuries that seemed determined to keep interrupting his momentum. The torn ACL, the torn MCL, the constant effort to get back to full strength. Week after week, there were questions about availability, questions about snap counts, questions about whether he'd ever truly look like himself again. That's why the latest update feels so important. During mandatory minicamp, right tackle Brian O'Neill delivered the kind of praise that immediately grabs your attention. He said Darrisaw looks unbelievable. Not good. Not improved. Unbelievable. Then he reminded everyone of something Vikings fans should never forget. When healthy, Christian Darrisaw is one of the best tackles in football. That's not teammate hype. The numbers support it. Before the injuries piled up, he consistently ranked among the elite at his position. The Vikings invested heavily in him for a reason, handing him a massive extension worth more than $100 million. They view him as a foundational piece. And if Minnesota is going to maximize whoever wins the quarterback job, that investment must pay off. Everything offensively becomes easier when your left tackle is playing at that level. The encouraging part is that Darrisaw himself sounds optimistic. He recently said his knee feels better than it has in 2 years. Full motion, no limitations, trending in the right direction. Those are exactly the words Vikings Nation wanted to hear. Of course, health concerns aren't limited to the offensive line. First-round rookie Caleb Banks also enters the spotlight. The talent is undeniable. The physical tools jump off the screen. Some evaluators believe he has the potential to become one of the most disruptive interior pass rushers from his draft class. But potential only matters if you're available. Foot injuries limited him significantly during his final college season, and Minnesota is betting that those issues are behind him. That's a gamble every team makes with young talent. Sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. That's the challenge every contender faces. Talent wins games, but availability sustains seasons. As training camp approaches, two very different players are carrying the same responsibility. Stay healthy. Because if both can do that, the ceiling of this football team rises dramatically. Sometimes the most meaningful football stories have nothing to do with touchdowns, contracts, or depth charts. Sometimes they're about what happens after the cheering stops, after the locker room empties, after the playing career ends. This week brought one of those stories, and honestly, it's hard not to appreciate what it says about the culture Kevin O'Connell continues to build. During off-season workouts, a familiar face returned to Minnesota, but he wasn't catching passes this time. He wasn't fighting for a roster spot either. Instead, Tristan Jackson walked back into the building with an entirely different mission. He's beginning a coaching career. Jackson is participating in the Bill Walsh Diversity Coaching Fellowship Program alongside former Vikings defensive back Bobby McCain. Both are getting an opportunity to learn, teach, and experience life from the other side of the game. For longtime Vikings fans, Jackson's story feels especially meaningful. He wasn't a star. He wasn't a household name. He was one of those players who fought for every opportunity. Practice squad, roster battles, limited chances. Yet he kept showing up. Over 4 seasons with Minnesota, he became part of the team's fabric, even if the statistics never reflected it. Now he's helping coach the same position group he once belonged to. There's something powerful about that. It also says a lot about the trust this organization continues to build with its players. O'Connell has repeatedly emphasized helping former players discover what's next after football. It's a philosophy rooted in relationships rather than transactions. We've already seen examples. Former tight end Ben Ellefson transitioned into a coaching role. Now Jackson and McCain are getting similar opportunities. McCain's path looks different, of course. He spent a decade in the NFL and started dozens of games throughout his career. His experience brings another valuable perspective to young players trying to establish themselves. But the bigger takeaway here isn't about either man's resume. It's about the organization. The Vikings continue investing in people, not just players. That matters. Culture matters. The best organizations don't simply develop talent on Sundays, they help develop futures. Maybe Jackson eventually becomes a full-time coach. Maybe McCain follows a similar route. Nobody knows yet. But seeing former players return to Minnesota because they believe in the environment being created here says something important. It tells you the connections inside this building continue long after the final whistle. As we sit here looking ahead to training camp, it's amazing how many important questions are still hanging in the air. Can TJ Hawkinson prove he still belongs among the league's top tight ends? Will Minnesota make another move to strengthen the pass rush? Can Christian Darrisaw finally enjoy a healthy season and remind everyone why he's so valuable? And how many future coaches are quietly taking their first steps inside this organization right now? That's what makes this time of year so exciting. Every development feels a little more important because the answers are getting closer. Let me know which story stood out most to you, and as always, thank you for being part of this incredible Vikings community. We'll keep following every twist together. Stay tuned. Skol Vikings, let's go!